In the summer of 1996, I delivered a paper at a convention of the Association of Municipal Clerks and Treasurers. Apparently, my workshop was New Techniques in Bylaw Enforcement. So this is a summary of two responses to the people who put the presentation on, summarizing people in the audience's assessment of the delivery of my paper. On one, I sort of struck out. On number two, it looks pretty positive. One respondent identified me as very competent / informative on provisions of the law. Very informative session, he wrote, or she wrote. I had a client that was working with Four Seasons as kind of a joint venture partner on a particular project. And there was Four Seasons architect was a bit of a snooty a-hole. And at one point in time, let me take a step back. One of my clients' senior officer's wife was an architect, and she was working on the project for the client. In any event, Four Seasons architect kind of got in her face, and at one point in time basically accused her on paper of being incompetent. And so it was generally felt that was deserving, on my side of the fence, it was deserving of some kind of recompense or reckoning. So when we met, eventually senior Four Seasons guy, Roger Garland, the vice chairman, was confirming that 5 weeks of usage would be provided free of charge at the Chiang Mai Resort, that's in Thailand, or the Nevis Resort. I delivered a paper at this particular seminar. It doesn't say on this page what it was about, but as I recall, it had something to do with site plan control, the application of site plan control to new development through the Planning Act. This is a thank you letter from Stephen Ledrew, a lawyer in Toronto. At the same time I was practicing. His son and my son Peter are very, very good friends and have been for quite some time. I worked with the Royal Bank of Canada on a project that their real estate arm was pursuing at the corner of King Street and Spadina. It all worked out very well. They got the approvals that they needed to build the building they needed, and we got along very well. Ultimately, the project didn't proceed. The recession that pretty much the world was experiencing about that time drove its implementation into the realm of impossible. I acted on a case, Loblaws against the chief building official of the town of Ancaster, Mr. Oliver. I was acting for Loblaws, and the tussle had to do with the chief building official issuing a building permit for the construction of a Price Club super box store. Now, Price Club isn't around anymore. It was acquired by Costco, but it was the same kind of concept. A huge hangar-size building full of stuff in large sizes and so forth. It became a significant case for some legal principles that it established. Canada Law Book wrote me a letter asking me for some information because they were going to, and did, report the case in the Dominion Law Reports. That's kind of a big deal. The decision was eventually reported in the Dominion Law Reports. There were appeals. Price Club lost the case. Loblaws won. Price Club appealed the decision to the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal. And we cross-appeal with respect to the cost order because the lower court had decided not to award costs to either party for reasons that may or may not be set out in the decision. As it happens, both the appeal and the cross-appeal were dismissed. This summarizes my response to the Law Book Company's inquiry. Assisting me at the trial was a lawyer a little bit younger than me by the name of David Miller. He went on to be mayor of the city of Toronto. This you could call a fragment of the documentary record of a committee of adjustment matter that a client had engaged me to pursue in the city of Toronto. And the ward councillor's general letter sent out to all and sundry kind of indicates how fires can get stoked and things can get complicated. This ultimately went on to the OMB, and this was the period of the Ray government, the NDP. They appointed Looney Tunes to the OMB, and we lost at the OMB. 30 years ago, developers traded objections to their respective enemies' projects in order to lever something else or this, that, and the other thing. This is a letter from Lloyd Alter, who was the architect on a project on Wellington Street that I had lodged objection to on behalf of a client. It all got it sorted out between the clients themselves, and it was withdrawn. And he was just sort of thanking me to get together. He lived across the street from me and my family at 39 Thome Crescent. And the Bruce McCormick he speaks of owned the house 2 doors down from 39 Thome Crescent. So I guess that would make it 35 Thome Crescent. Yeah. I can't recall what I did to deserve this thank you, but it's positive, so I include it. From some point in 1989 until 1992, I acted as counsel to real estate developers trying to get approval for a regional shopping center in the city of Woodstock. This was a note from one of the city councilors, Sandy Talbot, which reported on some attitudes towards me and my client during the early days of the adventure. So the editors of the newspaper gave me a boo for my views on how to take the attitudes of certain objectors to the shopping center. And the editors told me to get back to the salt mines. I acted for some heavyweights in their efforts to enlarge the Hudson's Bay Center, which is located at the northeast corner of Yonge Street and Bloor in the city of Toronto. They wanted to construct a high-rise addition for residential condominiums at the West End. And there were legal issues, and I got involved with respect to one aspect, and apparently I clinched the deal. A municipal election in Scarborough one year was so close that there was a judicial recount of the votes and in front of a judge of the Superior Court of Justice. I acted for the counselor, the incumbent counselor, and he'd been a counselor for years and years and years, to represent him on the recount. It resulted in his re-election being confirmed, and here he thanks me. A partner of mine, Jane Pepino, had a client that was a group of ratepayers opposing a proposal by a church to build a senior citizens home in its church's backyard, so to speak. I handled the hearing, and the outcome was positive, probably not surprisingly, although the city staff, at that time it was the City of York staff, were in favor of it. The council was not, the ratepayers were not, and the Ontario Municipal Board was not. This is a copy of my letter to Nick Kingersty, who was the clerk administrator of the town of Fort Frances for many, many years. I came to know him when I was, I think I was even an articling student, but certainly a junior lawyer at Macaulay Perry Farley Honestchuk. They had a big case in which one of the two counsel of Macaulay Perry Farley Honestchuk handled. His name was Royce Frith. He was a senator, Canadian senator, but a practicing lawyer. And the case involved a dam that was owned by Boise Cascade, the lumber paper company, which had been built on the strength of a contract signed like 80 years earlier or something, that gave a royalty to the town of Fort Frances for the privilege of building the dam and being able to use it. And as well, it provided for the delivery of power to the town of Fort Frances up to certain limits. The royalty payments became ridiculous over the years relative to the price of electricity, and the town was suing to get a declaration that in effect, the contract terms should be viewed as malleable, and the royalty should be adjusted for inflation, in effect. Anyway, the Supreme Court of Canada did not agree. A thank you note for a client dealing with a project in the mid-'80s when the market was very, very hot. This was a very large project in the area of Lawrence and Don Mills Road in Toronto. A partner at Aird and Burles had referred a relative of his, I think he was his uncle, for me to handle a case that regarding the severance of his uncle's or relative's property in King City, and it all worked out very well. It turned out he was quite a very powerful executive. He was involved as the head honcho in a very major project in the downtown of Toronto. That said, this was his personal endeavor. That project was the new CBC building on Front Street in Toronto, opposite the Convention Center. John Aird, as well as being a named partner in the Aird Burles law firm, had been Lieutenant Governor of Ontario for a term or two. His license plate was a vanity plate that said LG25. He was the 25th Lieutenant Governor of the province of Ontario. Here he is thanking me for something. He was a great guy, just a delightful, nice person. Martindale Hubbell is a publisher of directories of various professions, including the legal profession. Their directories go back decades, and if you were to buy one I'll say 10 years ago. I'm not even sure they publish them in print anymore as opposed to online. It would be 3 volumes, each about 5 inches thick. They used to conduct surveys of lawyers, I think only when they're in large law firms, as I was for a period of time, to survey other professionals as to what they may think about you from various aspects: professionalism, ethics, so forth. Anyway, Martindale and Hubble rates me 4.4 5.0, which is pretty good. They trade off their surveys by offering plaques to lawyers who get high ratings. They do that by soliciting through email. I'm not going to pay what they want for these things. I don't think I've ever checked the price, but it was more than $1. I wouldn't buy it. But I copied the photo in their sales pitch, and this is it. If I wanted to, I could have one of these hanging in my office, but that's not me. I've thrown out more plaques than, in fact, I've thrown out every plaque I've ever received.